On Easter Sunday, in a cathedral filled with the scent of lilies and the hushed expectations of 500 guests, Charity Grant stood at the altar staring at the man she was supposed to spend forever with. The choir's hallelujah was a roar in her ears, but all she could see was the tiny, vibrating notification on the phone hidden in her bouquet. A final notice of foreclosure. A withdrawal of $80,000 she didn't authorize. She looked at Oliver, his smile so polished, so practiced, and realized he wasn't her savior, he was her ruin. Then, she did the unthinkable. She lifted the heavy silk of her wedding dress, took one step back, and walked away. No explanation. No tears. Just the sound of her heels clicking against the marble as she abandoned her life. But what no one knew was this: in less than 72 hours, she would sign a contract to carry a stranger's child. A man who had once been a priest. A man who had buried the love of his life and had no idea the woman standing in front of him now was her identical twin sister. The silence in the church as I walked out was louder than the music. I could feel Oliver's confusion turning into heat at my back, but I didn't stop until the heavy oak doors slammed behind me. I didn't go to the reception. I didn't go on my honeymoon. I went in my office, stripped off the Vera Wang, and sat in my slips staring at my bank statements. Oliver hadn't just cheated, he had liquidated me. Every cent I'd earned as an interior designer, every legacy my parents left, gone into some investment that smelled like a gambling debt. The knock at my door wasn't him, though. It was a man in a suit I didn't recognize, handing me a business card that felt too heavy to be paper. "You're in a corner, Ms. Grant," he said, his voice like cold gravel. "My employer needs something you have. In exchange, your debts disappear tonight." I should have asked more questions. I should have been terrified. But when you're standing in the ashes of your wedding day, fear feels like a luxury you can't afford. I signed the preliminary NDA without reading the fine print. I just wanted to disappear. 2 days later, I was sitting in a sterile, glass-walled office that felt more like an interrogation room than a clinic. A woman with a tight bun and a tighter expression pushed a file across the desk. "The client requires total discretion. No contact with the outside world for the duration. You will be compensated $5 million upon successful delivery." $5 million. It wasn't just debt-clearing money, it was never see Oliver again money. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice rasping. "The father." "A man of high standing," she replied. "He's specific about the genetic profile. You were flagged because of your health records and your lineage." I thought she meant my Ivy League degree or my clean bill of health. I didn't realize she meant the face I shared with a ghost. I signed the final contract, the ink bleeding into the paper like a blood pact. It wasn't until I was driven 3 hours upstate to a fortress of stone and shadows that I felt the first real prickle of dread. The gates opened like teeth. The house was cold. Not because of the air conditioning, but because it felt hollowed out. I was led to a library where the walls were lined with leather-bound books that looked like they hadn't been touched in a century. And then, he walked in. Ethan Kang didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who had been at war with God and won, but lost his soul in the process. He was tall, his presence so heavy it felt like the oxygen left the room when he entered. He wore black, a simple, high-collared shirt that hinted at his past. He didn't look at my body. He looked at my eyes, and for a second, I saw his hand tremble. Just a fraction of an inch. "You're late," he said. His voice was a deep, melodic baritone that made my skin itch. I had to pack my life into a suitcase. I snapped back, my natural defensiveness kicking in. Turns out, it doesn't take long when your fiancé steals your house. Ethan took a step closer. He didn't smile. He didn't even look sympathetic. "I don't care about your fiancé. I care about the life you're carrying. You will eat what I tell you. You will sleep when I tell you. You are a vessel for the only thing I have left in this world." A vessel? Wow. And here I thought chivalry was dead, I muttered, crossing my arms. "Listen, Mr. King, or is it Father Kang? I heard you used to wear the collar. Do I get a discount on my sins while I'm here?" His eyes flashed a dark, dangerous spark that told me I had pushed too far. He moved so fast I didn't have time to blink, pinning me against the mahogany bookshelf. He didn't touch me with his hands, but his body was a wall of heat. I am no longer a priest, Charity. Do not mistake my restraint for holiness. The tension between us was a physical thing, a wire pulled so tight it was humming. I could smell cedarwood and something metallic, like rain on hot pavement. My heart was thudding against my ribs, not just from fear, but from a sudden, terrifying jolt of electricity. I looked up at him, my breath hitching. "Then what are you?" I whispered. "I am the man who is paying for your silence," he said, his gaze dropping to my lips before he pulled away abruptly. "Dinner is at 7. Don't be late again." As he walked out, I sank into a chair, my legs shaking. I needed this money, but looking at Ethan Kang, I realized the price might be higher than $5 million. I felt like I was being watched, not by him, but by the house itself. I wandered toward the hallway, trying to find my way back to the guest wing, when I passed a room with the door slightly ajar. It was a study, filled with sunlight. On the desk sat a framed photograph. I stopped. My blood turned to ice. It was a woman, laughing in a garden. She was wearing a simple white sundress, her hair blowing in the wind. She looked happy. She looked vibrant. She looked exactly like me. But I knew that wasn't me. I never liked sundresses, and I hadn't laughed like that in years. That was Grace. My twin sister died in a hit-and-run 3 years ago. The sister who had moved to the city to find herself and ended up disappearing from my life months before she passed. A shadow fell over the doorway. I didn't have to turn around to know it was him. She was beautiful, wasn't she? Ethan's voice was right behind my ear. "How did you know her?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She was the only reason I ever believed in anything," he whispered. I turned to face him, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He didn't want a surrogate. He wanted a resurrection. And he didn't know that the woman he was staring at wasn't just a lookalike. She was the other half of the soul he had lost. If you're hooked on this mystery and want to see how Charity survives this gilded cage, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below with your wildest theory on what Ethan is really hiding. The air in the room grew thick. I wanted to scream that I was her sister, to demand how he knew her, but the contract felt like a noose around my neck. "Why me?" I managed to choke out. Ethan reached out, his thumb grazing my jawline. His touch was light, but it felt like a brand. "Because when I saw your file, I thought I was hallucinating. I thought the universe was giving me a second chance to get it right." "I'm not her, Ethan," I said, using his name for the first time. His jaw tightened. "I know that." She was soft. You're a storm. But the child will have her eyes. That is all that matters." He turned and left me alone with the ghost of my sister. I stood there, clutching my stomach, wondering if I had just traded one devil for another. Oliver had stolen my money, but Ethan Kang was after something much more dangerous. He was after my identity. Over the next week, the house became a beautiful prison. Ethan was everywhere and nowhere. He would appear at breakfast, watching me eat in a silence so heavy it made me want to scream. He would leave small gifts on my nightstand, a book of poetry, a silk robe, a bowl of the specific wild berries Grace used to love. Every gesture was a needle to my heart. He was courting a memory, and I was the mannequin he was dressing up. "You know," I said one night over a dinner of sea bass and awkwardness, "in my culture, we actually talk to people we live with." It's a wild concept, I know. Ethan didn't look up from his wine. I find that words usually complicate things that are better left simple. "Simple? You've got me locked in a mansion upstate carrying a baby for a woman you're obsessed with. There is nothing simple about this, Father." He slammed his glass down. "Stop calling me that." "Why? Does it remind you of the vows you broke? Or the fact that you're trying to play God now?" He stood up, rounding the table with a predatory grace. I didn't flinch. I was done being afraid. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. You think you're so brave, Charity. But you're just as broken as I am. You ran from a wedding because you were too ashamed to admit you chose a man who didn't love you. You're here because you have nowhere else to go. I'm here because I'm a survivor, I hissed. And I'll survive you too. For a moment, the mask of the cold billionaire cracked. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw a raw, bleeding hunger in his eyes that had nothing to do with grace. He wanted to break me, or maybe he wanted me to break him. He reached out, his hand tangling in my hair, pulling my head back just enough so I had to look at him. You're nothing like her, he whispered, his voice ragged. She was praying. You're a temptation. The heat between us was so thick I could practically taste it, metallic and sweet, like a storm breaking over a desert. Ethan's grip on my hair wasn't painful, but it was possessive, a silent admission that he was losing the war against his own restraint. He looked at my mouth as if it were a confession he wasn't ready to make. For a heartbeat, I thought he was going to kiss me, to bridge the gap between his holy past and this sinful present. Instead, he let go so abruptly I nearly stumbled. Go to your room, Charity, he said, his voice dropping an octave, returning to that icy, detached mask. The doctor will be here in the morning for the implantation. Don't make this harder than it already is. I didn't argue. I turned and ran, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. That night, I didn't dream of Oliver or the wedding I'd left behind. I dreamed of incense, the sound of a choir, and Ethan's hands, not folded in prayer, but wrapped around mine. The next morning, the clinical reality of the contract came crashing back. The medical suite in the East Wing was more advanced than most hospitals. Ethan stood by the window, his back to me, staring out at the gray morning mist as the doctors worked. It was cold, impersonal, and efficient. When it was over, I felt a strange, hollow ache. I was officially carrying a life tied to a man who looked at me and saw a ghost, and a sister I was only now realizing I never truly knew. The recovery period required bed rest, which meant Ethan was forced into my orbit more than ever. He would bring me tea, his movements silent and graceful. One afternoon, he found me staring at a sketch pad, trying to distract myself by drawing the view of the jagged cliffs outside. You have talent, he remarked, leaning against the doorframe. He looked relaxed for the first time, his top button undone. I'm an interior designer, Ethan. Space and light are my languages, I said, not looking up. Though your house is a bit of a challenge. It's a lot of brooding Victorian meets I'm hiding from the world. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. And what would you change? I'd tear down these heavy drapes for starters. Let the light in. You're living in a tomb, and you're too young to be buried. He walked over and sat at the edge of the bed. The weight of him shifted the mattress, bringing that scent of cedar and rain closer. Some of us deserve the tomb, Charity. I spent years hearing the sins of others while keeping my own locked away. I thought I could save everyone. I couldn't even save her. Grace wouldn't have wanted you to live like this, I said softly, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Ethan froze. His eyes sharpened, boring into mine. How do you know what she would have wanted? My pulse spiked. I was on the edge of the cliff. I just mean, no one wants the person they love to stop living. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of my collarbone, barely touching skin, but sending jolts of electricity through me. You speak of her as if you knew her heart. It's unsettling. Sometimes I look at you, and I'm convinced the universe is playing a cruel joke on me. Maybe it's not a joke, I whispered, leaning into his touch despite every warning bell in my head. Maybe it's a bridge. He pulled his hand back as if it was burning. I'm a businessman now, Charity. I don't believe in bridges. Only contracts. But the contracts didn't account for the quiet moments. They didn't account for the way he started staying later in my room, telling me stories of his travels, the rugged mountains of Tibet, the crowded streets of Seoul, anywhere he had run to try and escape his grief. And I told him about the projects I'd lost, the dreams Oliver had bled dry, and the sister I had lost touch with long before she died. She changed, Ethan, I said one rainy evening, tucked under the covers while he sat in the armchair by the fire. Grace. About a year before the accident, she just drifted. She stopped calling. She moved to a part of the city I didn't recognize. I thought she hated me. Ethan stared into the flames, his expression unreadable. She didn't hate you. She was protecting you. Protecting me from what? From the world I live in, he said darkly. A world where people like Oliver are the small fish. There are sharks out there, Charity. And your sister knew how to swim with them, but she didn't want you in the water. Before I could press him for more, a loud, discordant noise shattered the peace of the house. The front gate's security alarm was blaring. My stomach dropped. I knew that sound. Or rather, I knew the person likely causing it. Ethan was on his feet in a second, his entire aura shifting from grieving lover to a man who controlled empires. He checked a tablet on the wall, his jaw tightening. It seems your past has caught up with us. I followed him to the monitors. On the grainy security feed, a car was rammed against the gate. A man was stumbling out, screaming my name, waving a bottle of champagne like a club. Oliver. Charity. I know you're in there, he roared, his voice distorted by the rain and the speakers. You think you can just leave? You owe me. That money was an investment. You're my wife, damn it. He's drunk, I whispered, a cold sweat breaking out. And he's desperate. Ethan, he's dangerous when he loses his ego. Ethan didn't look scared. He looked bored, the kind of boredom that usually precedes a massacre. He smoothed his suit jacket and turned to me. Stay in this room. Do not come out until I tell you. Ethan, don't hurt him. Just make him go away. He looked at me, a cold, ruthless light in his eyes. I am a man of many talents, Charity. Mercy is no longer one of them. He walked out, the click of the door sounding like a gunshot. I couldn't stay put. I crept to the top of the grand staircase, peering through the banisters as the massive front doors swung open. The wind and rain whipped into the foyer, and Oliver stumbled in, looking pathetic and bedraggled in his ruined tuxedo. Where is she? Oliver demanded, pointing a finger at Ethan. Who the hell are you? Some priest turned pimp. Ethan didn't move. He stood in the center of the hall, a pillar of shadow. You are trespassing on private property, Mr. Grant. And you are speaking about a woman who no longer belongs to you. In fact, she never did. She was just a line of credit to you, wasn't she? She's my meal ticket. Oliver yelled, his face turning a purplish red. I'll sue you for kidnapping. I'll tell the press she's a surrogate for hire. I'll ruin both of you. Ethan took a slow, measured step forward. There was something terrifying about his stillness. You won't do any of that. Because if you breathe her name to a soul, I will look into those investments of yours. I'll find the men you borrowed from, the ones who don't use lawyers to collect. I imagine they'd be very interested to know where you're hiding. Oliver blanched. The bravado drained out of him, replaced by a raw, naked fear. You don't know who you're messing with. I know exactly who I'm messing with, Ethan said, his voice a low, lethal silk. A man who steals from the woman he claimed to love is not a man. He's a parasite. And I have a very low tolerance for pests. Ethan signaled to the shadows, and two large men I hadn't seen before appeared, grabbing Oliver by the arms. Get him out of my sight, Ethan commanded. And if he ever touches these gates again, ensure he can't walk to them a third time. As they dragged a screaming Oliver out into the night, Ethan stood alone in the foyer. He looked up, his gaze finding me hiding on the landing. The anger in his face vanished, replaced by something much more complicated. He climbed the stairs, his eyes never leaving mine. When he reached me, he didn't say a word. He just reached out and tucked a stray hair behind my ear. His hand was steady, but his eyes were searching mine for a sign of fear. Are you okay? He asked. You're not just a businessman, are you? I whispered. I am whatever I need to be to protect what is mine, he replied. And am I yours, Ethan? Or is this just the contract talking? He leaned in, his breath warm against my cheek. The contract doesn't make my heart race when you walk into a room, Charity. The contract doesn't make me want to burn the world down just because a man raised his voice to you. He started to pull away, but I grabbed his lapel, pulling him back. The tension was an ache now, a desperate need to feel something real in this house of ghosts. Then stop hiding behind the paper, I challenged. Ethan's eyes darkened. He let out a low, frustrated groan and pressed me against the wall, his mouth hovering just an inch from mine. You have no idea what you're asking for. If I start, I won't be able to stop. And I can't lose you like I lost her. I'm not her. I cried out, the frustration finally boiling over. Look at me, Ethan. Stop looking for Grace and look at Charity. He shook his head, his forehead resting against mine. That's the problem. I am looking at you. And for the first time in 3 years, I'm forgetting her. The weight of that confession hung between us, beautiful and terrifying. But as he went to say more, my phone, which I'd left on the banister, buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I glanced down at the screen. I know why he chose you. Check the attic. Ask him about the red room. He didn't just love Grace. He killed her. The text on the screen felt like a physical blow to my chest. He killed her. My hand shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. Ethan noticed the shift in my energy immediately, his eyes narrowing as he sensed the wall going up between us. Charity? What is it? He asked, reaching for me. I stepped back, my spine hitting the cold stone wall. Nothing. Just Oliver. He's still texting. I need to lie down, Ethan. This is all too much. He didn't believe me. I could see the suspicion in the way his jaw tightened, but he didn't push. He just nodded once, a sharp, clinical movement. The doctor said stress is the enemy. Sleep. We will talk in the morning. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade down the long gallery toward his own wing. The house felt different now, no longer a sanctuary, but a labyrinth of secrets. The red room. The attic. My sister had died in a hit-and-run, a tragic accident on a rainy night in the city. At least, that's what the police told me. That's what the closed casket suggested. I grabbed a flashlight from my bedside drawer and slipped out into the hall. The air was colder up here, near the ceiling. The stairs to the attic were hidden behind a narrow door disguised as a linen closet. It groaned as I pushed it open, the sound echoing like a scream through the silent house. The attic wasn't a dusty storage space. It was a shrine. My breath hitched as I swept the light across the room. There were sketches of Grace everywhere, hundreds of them, taped to the walls, pinned to easels. Grace laughing. Grace sleeping. Grace crying. But as I moved deeper, the red room revealed itself. It was a small, partitioned area draped in heavy crimson velvet. Inside, there was a desk covered in old journals and a laptop that was still plugged in, its cooling fan whirring softly. I opened the top journal. The handwriting was Ethan's, elegant, precise, but increasingly frantic. May 14th, she wants to leave the program. She says she can't handle the weight of the secrets. I told her there is no leaving. We're tied by blood and vow now. If she walks away, everything we built collapses. My heart hammered against my ribs. Program? Grace wasn't just a parishioner or a lover. She was involved in something deeper. I scrolled through the digital files on the laptop, my eyes blurring. There were names of politicians, bank routing numbers, and then the accident report. It wasn't a police report. It was a private security dossier. Subject: Grace Grant. Status: terminated. Reasoning: breach of confidentiality. Method: staged vehicular collision. A sob rose in my throat, and I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Ethan Kang wasn't just a grieving man. He was a monster who had ordered my sister's death when she became a liability. And now he has brought me here to replace her. To carry a child that would be the ultimate trophy of his control. You weren't supposed to come up here, Charity. The voice was like a blade across my throat. I spun around, the flashlight falling from my hand and rolling across the floor, the beam illuminating Ethan's shoes. He was standing in the doorway of the red room, his face half hidden in shadow, looking more like the ruthless boss the tabloids whispered about than the man who had tucked me into bed an hour ago. "You killed her," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You loved her, and then you killed her because she wanted to be free." Ethan stepped into the light. He didn't look angry. He looked exhausted, his eyes sunken and dark. "Is that what you think? That I could destroy the only light I ever had? It's right here, in your own files." I gestured wildly at the laptop. "Terminated. Staged collision. How could you? And then to bring me here, to use my face, my body." "I didn't order that hit, Charity," he said, his voice rising in a rare show of emotion. "I spent 3 years and $40 million finding out who did it. That dossier isn't my work, it's the evidence I gathered against the men who took her from me. The men I am currently dismantling piece by piece." He walked toward me, and this time I didn't back away. I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the raw agony in his expression. Grace discovered that the church's charity funds were being used to launder money for a syndicate, Ethan explained, his voice trembling. "She came to me because I was the only one she trusted. I tried to hide her. I tried to get her out. But they were faster. They used my own security protocols to track her." He stopped just inches from me, his heat radiating through my thin nightgown. "I brought you here because you were the only person left in the world who shared her blood. I thought if I could save you, if I could give you the life she never got to have, maybe God would finally forgive me for failing her. But the contract, the baby," I stammered. "The baby is the only way I could legally protect you," he said, his hand reaching out to cut my cheek. This time, his touch wasn't just electric, it was desperate. "As my surrogate, you are under my permanent protection. My enemies can't touch you without declaring war on my entire estate." It was never about a vessel, Charity. It was about a shield. I looked into his eyes, searching for the lie, but all I found was a man drowning in guilt. My hand came up to cover his, my fingers lacing through his. "You should have told me. I couldn't risk you looking at me the way you are right now," he whispered, with pity. "It's not a pity, Ethan." The tension shifted then. It wasn't about Grace anymore. It was about the two of us, standing in the wreckage of our pasts. He leaned down, his forehead resting against mine, his breath shaking. "I've spent 3 years in a graveyard, Charity. And then you walked into that interview, snapping at the doctors and demanding respect, and for the first time, I wanted to live again. Not for her. For you." He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine. "I know I'm a cold, ruthless man. I know I have blood on my hands. But if you stay, if you let me keep you safe, I will give you everything Oliver stole and more." I looked at the sketches of Grace on the walls. She felt like a memory now, a soft echo, while the man in front of me was a raging fire. "I don't want everything, Ethan. I just want the truth. Always." "You have it," he promised. He leaned in, and for a second, the world stopped. His lips brushed against mine, not a kiss, but a promise, a soft, lingering contact that made my toes curl. It was a test of restraint, a hunger so deep it felt like it would swallow us both. He pulled back, his eyes dark with desire. "Go back to bed, Charity," he rasped. "Before I forget that I'm supposed to be a gentleman." I laughed, a small, genuine sound that seemed to startle him. "You were never a gentleman, Ethan. You're a pirate in a 3-piece suit." "True," he smirked, the first real smile I'd seen on him. "But at least I have good taste in treasure." I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, he called out my name. "Charity? About that funny quote you liked. A man who hides behind a collar is just a man with a laundry problem?" "Yeah. I fixed the laundry problem," he said, his eyes twinkling. I went back to my room, my heart lighter than it had been since the wedding. But as I settled under the covers, I realized something Ethan hadn't mentioned. If the syndicate killed Grace for what she knew, and I was her twin, wouldn't they eventually realize the replacement was just as dangerous as the original? The thought kept me awake until dawn, when a knock at the door changed everything again. It was the head of security. Mr. Kang? We have a problem. Oliver Sterling didn't go home. He went to the police. And he didn't go alone. He brought a lawyer from the syndicate. The war wasn't over. It was just moving into the light. The news about the syndicate lawyer hit like a physical weight, but Ethan didn't even flinch. He stood by the window of my bedroom, the early morning light catching the sharp angle of his jaw. He looked like a statue carved from obsidian, cold, beautiful, and utterly immovable. "Let them come," he said, his voice dropping into that dangerous, low register. "Oliver is a child playing with matches. He doesn't realize he's standing in a room full of gasoline." I sat up, clutching the duvet to my chest. "Ethan, if they have a lawyer, they have a way in. They'll claim kidnapping. They'll use the surrogacy contract against us." He turned, and for a second, the ruthless Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man who looked at me with a terrifying amount of possessiveness. "They can claim whatever they like. You signed that contract of your own free will, Charity. And as for the syndicate, they've been looking for a reason to step into my territory. Oliver just gave them a key." He walked over to the bed, sitting on the edge and taking my hand. His skin was hot against my cold fingers. "I need you to trust me. No matter what they say, no matter what lies Oliver screams at the gates, stay inside. My men are stationed at every entry point. You are the only thing in this world I cannot afford to lose again." "I'm not Grace, Ethan," I whispered, my heart doing a slow, heavy roll in my chest. "You can't keep me in a tower." "I know you're not her," he rasped, his thumbs stroking my knuckles. "Grace was a saint who died for a secret. You're a fighter who walked away from a life that wasn't good enough for her. I'm not keeping you in a tower to hide you. I'm keeping you here because if I let you go, I'll have to burn everything down to get you back." The intensity in his eyes was almost too much to bear. It wasn't just protection, it was a slow-burn obsession that made my blood hum. I reached out, my fingers tracing the scar on his temple, a remnant of the life he'd left behind. "Is that a threat or a promise?" "In my world, they're the same thing," he said, leaning in until our foreheads touched. The scent of him, expensive cologne and raw power, swirled around me. "You have this way of making me forget I was ever a man of God, Charity. Every time you look at me like that, I want to break every vow I ever took." "Maybe the vows were the problem," I whispered. "Maybe we're always meant to be the storm, not the sanctuary." He let out a jagged breath, his lips grazing the corner of mine. It was a torturous, lingering contact that spoke of a desire he was barely holding back. "If I'm the storm, you're the only thing that keeps me from destroying everything. Now, get dressed. We have guests." An hour later, the foyer was a battlefield of redirected energy. Oliver was there, looking smug in a cheap suit, flanked by a man in a charcoal gray outfit whose eyes were as dead as a shark's. "There she is," Oliver shouted as I descended the stairs behind Ethan. "Look at her. She's drugged or brainwashed. She walked out of our wedding and straight into this freak's house." The lawyer, a man named Vance, stepped forward. "Mr. Kang, we represent the interests of Mr. Grant. He claims his fiancé was coerced into a medical contract under duress. We're here to escort Ms. Grant to a neutral location for a wellness check." Ethan didn't even look at the lawyer. He kept his eyes on Oliver, his hands shoved casually into his pockets. "A neutral location? You mean a safe house owned by the families Grace was investigating?" Vance's expression didn't flicker. "I don't know what you're talking about. We're here for the lady." "The lady is staying exactly where she is," Ethan said. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying vibration of violence that made the air feel heavy. "And as for you, Oliver, I told you what would happen if you came back. You're not just a debtor anymore. You're a traitor." Oliver laughed, though it sounded forced. "You think you're so tough? You're a failed priest living in a big house. I have the law on my side." "I am the law in this county," Ethan said simply. He snapped his fingers, and suddenly, the room was swarming with his security detail, men who looked significantly more capable than the syndicate's legal muscle. "Mr. Vance, tell your employers that if they want Charity, They'll have to come through me. And I don't use subpoenas. I use high-caliber arguments. Vance looked at the armed men and then back at Ethan. He saw the truth in Ethan's eyes, the willingness to kill, the lack of fear. He grabbed Oliver's arm. "We're leaving." "What?" "No," Oliver yelled. "She's mine." Ethan moved so fast it was a blur. He had Oliver by the throat, pinning him against the heavy oak door. "She was never yours," Ethan hissed, his face inches from Oliver's. "She was a queen you tried to turn into a slave. If I ever hear you claim her again, I will personally ensure you never speak another word." He flung Oliver away like a piece of trash. The two men scrambled out, the heavy doors slamming shut behind them. Ethan stood there for a long moment, his chest heaving, his hands balled into fists. I walked down the last few steps and stood behind him. "Ethan?" He turned around, and the raw, animalistic fury in his eyes made me gasp. He looked like he wanted to tear the world apart. But then he looked at me, and the fire softened into a desperate, aching need. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands framing my face. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said, his voice ragged. "Don't be," I said, my heart racing. He deserved worse. Ethan's gaze dropped to my lips. The restraint he'd been practicing for weeks finally snapped. He kissed me, not the soft, tentative brush of before, but a deep, demanding claim that tasted of desperation and dark chocolate. It was a kiss that wiped away the memory of Oliver, the wedding, and even the ghost of my sister. In his arms, I wasn't a replacement or a surrogate. I was a woman being worshipped by a man who had forgotten how to pray. He pulled back just an inch, his thumb tracing my lower lip. "I shouldn't have done that." "Do it again," I challenged, a playful spark returning to my eyes despite the danger. "Or are you afraid the ruthless boss can't handle a little interior design?" A dark chuckle rumbled in his chest. "You're going to be the death of me, Charity Grant." "At least you'll die happy," I teased. But as he led me back upstairs, his hand firmly in mine, I saw the way he glanced at the security monitors. The syndicate wouldn't stop at a lawyer. They had seen me now. They knew I was the image of the woman who almost took them down. Later that evening, as I was looking through some of the old records Ethan had given me, I found a small, leather-bound diary tucked into the back of a drawer in the library. It wasn't Ethan's. It was Grace's. I opened it, my breath catching as I saw her familiar, loopy handwriting. June 12th, Ethan thinks he's protecting me. He doesn't know that I've already seen the files. He doesn't know about the Easter Sunday protocol. If anything happens to me, Charity has to be the one. She's the only one strong enough to finish what I started. Ethan will look for me in her, but he'll find something better. My heart stopped. She had planned this. The surrogacy, the contact, the timing. My sister hadn't just been a victim, she had been the architect. She knew Oliver was a mistake. She knew I would need a way out. And she knew that Ethan Kang was the only man capable of keeping me alive. But there was one final note at the bottom of the page, written in a shaky hand. "Tell Ethan the truth about the child. It's not just his. It's the key to the vault." I looked up as Ethan walked into the room, a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. "Finding more to complain about regarding my decor?" he asked, trying to lighten the mood. I closed the diary and hid it behind my back. "Ethan, if this baby wasn't just a child, if it was something else, would you still want me?" He paused, the glass halfway to his lips. "Charity, I told you. This isn't about the contract anymore. It's about you." "But what if the contract was a lie from the beginning?" Before he could answer, the lights in the house flickered and died. The backup generators didn't kick in. In the sudden, oppressive darkness, I heard the sound of glass shattering downstairs. "Stay behind me," Ethan commanded, his voice turning into ice. "The sharks are finally in the water." The darkness was absolute, a thick, velvet shroud that smelled of ozone and impending violence. Ethan didn't reach for a light, he reached for me. His hand found my waist, pulling me flush against his side as he drew a sleek, matte black handgun from the small of his back. The transition was seamless. One moment he was the brooding man who'd almost kissed me breathless. The next he was a predator in his natural habitat. "Basement," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "There's a reinforced panic room behind the wine cellar. Move, Charity. Now." We moved through the shadows of the mansion like ghosts. I could hear them downstairs, heavy boots, the rhythmic thud of suppressed gunfire clearing the security team. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my chest, but Ethan's grip was steady. We reached the service stairs, the cold stone biting at my bare feet. Every floorboard that creaked felt like a death sentence. "Ethan," I breathed as we reached the heavy steel door of the cellar. "The diary. Grace said the baby is the key to the vault." "What vault?" He paused, his eyes scanning the darkness above us. "I don't know, Charity. I thought the vault was a metaphor for her heart. She was always the poet, and I was just the soldier." He punched a code into a keypad hidden behind a rack of vintage Bordeaux. The wall slid open with the hiss of hydraulics. He shoved me inside the small, brightly lit room filled with monitors and emergency supplies. "Stay here. Lock it from the inside. Do not open it for anyone but me." "No." I grabbed his lapel, the silk bunching in my fist. "You're not going out there alone. There's at least 10 of them." He looked at me then, and the ruthlessness in his gaze softened into something agonizingly tender. He leaned down, pressing his forehead to mine. "I've spent 3 years dying, Charity. Since the moment I met you at that altar of yours, I finally felt a reason to fight. If I don't stop them here, they'll never stop hunting you. And I promised you no more running." "You're a terrible priest, Ethan Kang," I choked out, a stray tear escaping. "I was always better at the eye for an eye part," he smirked. Then he kissed me, hard, desperate, and tasting of a final goodbye. He stepped back, the door sliding shut between us before I could scream his name. I collapsed against the monitors, watching the grainy black and white feeds. It was a massacre. Ethan moved through the house with a terrifying, silent efficiency. He wasn't just defending, he was hunting. He used the layout of the house like a weapon, flanking the mercenaries in the library, picking them off in the gallery. But then I saw him. Oliver. He wasn't fighting. He was being led by Vance, the syndicate lawyer, who was holding a tablet that seemed to be tracking something. They weren't looking for Ethan. They were looking for the Red Room. They were looking for Grace's research. I watched the screen, horrified, as Oliver pointed toward the attic stairs. "It's up there. Everything she stole. Just give me my cut and let me go." Vance didn't smile. He just nodded to a man with a sledgehammer. They were going to destroy the only evidence that could clear Ethan and avenge my sister. I looked at the control panel in the panic room. There was a red button labeled Environmental Purge. It was meant for fires. It would suck the oxygen out of the upper floors to stifle flames. It would also kill anyone in the attic. My hand hovered over the button. I saw Ethan on another screen, pinned down in the foyer by 3 men. He was bleeding from a graze on his shoulder, his ammunition running low. If I pushed this button, I'd save the evidence, but I'd become the monster they thought I was. "Think, Charity," I hissed to myself. What would Grace do? I looked back at the diary. The key to the vault. I looked at the ultrasound photo Ethan had tucked into the back of the book earlier that day. There was a tiny, faint blur on the side of the image, a series of numbers and letters I'd assumed were medical codes. GK 0412S. Grace Kang. April 12th, Easter Sunday. It wasn't a biological baby. The surrogacy wasn't about a child. The implantation had been a microdrive, hidden in a biocompatible casing. I wasn't carrying a life. I was carrying the digital destruction of the global syndicate. Grace had used me, her identical twin, to smuggle the data out of the city because she knew the syndicate was monitoring her every move. She knew I was the only person Ethan would protect with his life without asking questions. A cold laugh bubbled up in my throat. My sister was a genius, and I had the world's most expensive flash drive. Ethan. I screamed into the intercom. The attic is a distraction. It's me. I'm the vault. On the screen, Ethan froze. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes widening as the pieces clicked together. He realized why the doctors at the clinic had been so secretive. He realized why Grace had insisted on me. Vance. Ethan roared, his voice echoing through the house. You're looking in the wrong place. You want the data? It's right here. He stepped out into the middle of the foyer, arms spread wide, drawing every gun in the house toward him. It was a suicide play. He was making himself the target so they wouldn't look for the panic room. Ethan, no. I sobbed, hitting the door release. I couldn't let him die for a pile of code. I couldn't let him be the sacrifice for a sister who was already gone. I ran out of the cellar, my lungs burning, sprinting through the dark house toward the sound of his voice. I burst into the foyer just as Vance leveled his weapon at Ethan's chest. Stop. I screamed, standing between them. You want the encryption key? It's in my head. If you kill him, I'll never give it to you. Vance paused, his finger trembling on the trigger. Oliver was cowering behind a marble pillar, looking like the pathetic coward he'd always been. The girl is bluffing, Vance spat. Try me, I said, my voice as cold as Ethan's. GK? 0412, yes. That's the start. Want the rest? Put the gun down. The silence was deafening. Ethan was looking at me with a mix of horror and pride. Charity, get out of here, he commanded. Not without you, I said firmly. Vance lowered his gun an inch, a greedy glint in his eyes. Smart girl. Walk toward me, and maybe I'll let the priest live. I took a step forward, but Ethan caught my hand. His grip was tight, a silent message. Trust me. You know, Vance, Ethan said, his voice returning to that calm, terrifying silk. The problem with being a lawyer is you always assume people play by the rules. But I'm a man who's already lost everything once. I don't negotiate with pests. Suddenly, the front windows shattered as a tactical team, real police, led by the federal authorities Ethan had been feeding info to for years, swarmed the building. Flashbangs turned the world white. In the chaos, Ethan tackled me to the floor, shielding my body with his. I heard Oliver screaming, the sound of handcuffs clicking, and the heavy thud of Vance being taken down. But as the smoke cleared, Ethan didn't move. He stayed heavy on top of me, his breathing shallow. Ethan? I whispered, my hands searching for blood. Ethan, talk to me. He groaned, rolling onto his back, his hand clutching his side. I think I liked it better when we were just arguing about drapes. You're an idiot, I cried, laughing through the tears as I pressed my dress against his wound. A big, heroic Korean Mafia boss idiot. And you, he gasped, reaching up to touch my face, are the most dangerous woman I've ever met. 5 million was a bargain. Wait, before we get to the end of this journey, the tension is about to reach its breaking point. If you want to know if Charity and Ethan make it out alive, or if the syndicate has one last card to play, you cannot leave now. This is the moment everything changes. The paramedics were swarming the foyer, the flashing blue and red lights reflecting off the blood-stained marble like a macabre disco. Ethan was pale, his eyes fluttering, but he refused to let the medics lift him onto the stretcher until he saw my face. I knelt beside him, my white wedding reception dress, the one I'd changed into days ago, now ruined by soot and his blood. The drive, Charity, he wheezed, his hand weakly finding mine. They'll still come for it. The feds, they aren't all clean. I leaned in close, my hair shielding our faces from the cameras and the chaos. Let them come, Ethan. I'm not just the vault. I'm the one with the combination. And I'm not giving it to anyone until you're standing on your own 2 feet. He managed a weak, bloody smirk. That's my girl. Bossy to the end. As they wheeled him out, the lead federal agent, a man with a face like a stone wall, stepped into my path. Ms. Grant, we need that device. It's a matter of national security. I stood up, wiping a streak of Ethan's blood from my cheek. I felt a coldness settling over me, a steel that hadn't been there when I walked down that aisle on Easter Sunday. It's a matter of my sister's life and Ethan's safety. You'll get what you need when I've vetted your entire department. Until then, I suggest you go find Oliver. He's the one who's been selling your secrets to the highest bidder. The next 48 hours were a blur of sterile hospital hallways and aggressive legal meetings. Ethan was in surgery for 6 hours to remove a bullet from his abdomen. I didn't leave the waiting room. I sat there with Grace's diary in my lap, reading and rereading her final entries. She hadn't just used me, she had loved me. She knew that by the time I found the drive, I would be exactly where I was now, in the arms of a man who would die to keep me safe. When Ethan finally woke up, the room was dark, save for the hum of the monitors. I was curled up in the chair next to his bed, my eyes heavy. "You're still here," he rasped, his voice sounding like sandpaper. I jumped up, reaching for the water pitcher. "You think a little lead is enough to get rid of me? I have an interior design fee to collect, Mr. Kang. And I charge by the hour for emotional distress." He took a sip of the water, his eyes never leaving mine. The intensity was back, even in his weakened state. "Come here." I sat on the edge of the bed, and he reached out, his fingers tangling in mine. "I saw the news. You handled the feds. You're a natural." "I learned from the best," I whispered. "But, Ethan, the drive. It's done. I gave them the encryption key after your team verified the lead agent. The syndicate is being dismantled as we speak. Grace, she won." Ethan's eyes clouded with a mix of grief and relief. He pulled my hand to his lips, kissing my knuckles. "And what about us, Charity? The contract is fulfilled. The baby is delivered. There's nothing keeping you here." The air in the room grew heavy with a different kind of tension, the kind that didn't come from guns or secrets, but from the raw, terrifying truth of what we'd become to each other. I looked at him, the man who had looked for my sister and found me instead. "You know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I never did get my honeymoon. And I've heard Korea is beautiful this time of year." Ethan's grip on my hand tightened. "I'm a dangerous man, Charity. Even with the syndicate gone, I have enemies. I have a past that doesn't wash off. And I'm a woman who walked out on a billionaire because he wasn't enough," I countered, leaning in until our noses touched. "I think I can handle a few enemies. As long as you're the one standing next to me." He groaned, a low sound of surrender, and pulled me down into a kiss. It was slow, soft, and tasted like the future. There were no ghosts in the room, no contracts, no lies. Just a man who had found his faith again, and a woman who had finally found a home. But as I pulled back to catch my breath, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a restricted number. I looked at Ethan, and he nodded for me to answer. "Hello," I said. "Charity Grant?" The voice was female, distorted and chillingly familiar. "You think it's over because you gave them the files? You only gave them the ones Grace wanted them to see. The real vault, the one that controls the banks, that's still inside you. And we're coming to collect the interest." I looked at Ethan, my blood turning to ice. The call ended, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying. "Ethan," I whispered. It wasn't just a microdrive. He sat up, ignoring the pain in his stitches, his eyes flashing with that old, lethal fire. "What do you mean?" "The doctor at the clinic, the one who did the implantation. He wasn't one of yours, was he?" Ethan's face went pale. "No. I thought he was yours." We looked at each other, the realization hitting us like a thunderbolt. The surrogacy hadn't just been about data. It was a biological weapon. A slow-acting toxin that was keyed to my DNA, and the only antidote was in the hands of the people we had just betrayed. "How long?" Ethan asked, his voice shaking. The caller said. 72 hours, I whispered. The same amount of time it took for me to sign the contract. Hold your breath. We are at the edge of the cliff. The final batch is coming, and everything you thought you knew about Charity, Ethan, and Grace is about to be turned upside down. Don't move. The room that had felt like a sanctuary seconds ago now felt like a death trap. Ethan ripped the 4 from his arm, the alarm on the monitor flatlining into a shrill, continuous scream that matched the panic rising in my throat. He didn't care about his stitches or the blood seeping through his gown. He lunged for his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "I need the clinic records. Not the ones we filed, the raw biometric data from the day of the procedure," he roared into the line. He looked at me, his eyes dark with a protective fury I'd never seen. "Charity, look at me. Breathe. I am not losing you. Not to them, not to God, not to anyone." "Ethan, they said 72 hours, I whispered, my hands trembling as I touched my stomach. "The contract. It wasn't a rescue mission. It was a death warrant." The hospital door burst open, but it wasn't the nurses. It was Ethan's private security, led by a woman with a medical bag. "Mr. Kang, we intercepted the transmission. The toxin is a synthetic protein. It's dormant until it hits a specific hormonal trigger, the ones caused by the pregnancy hormones the clinic gave her." I slumped back into the chair, the irony hitting me like a physical blow. The very thing that was supposed to tie me to Ethan was the thing that was killing me. Grace knew, I realized, the tears finally spilling over. She didn't just want me to save the data. She wanted me to replace her in every way, even in her death. "No," Ethan growled, grabbing my shoulders. "Grace loved you. She was desperate, but she wasn't a murderer. There has to be an out. Grace always left a back door." He grabbed the diary from the nightstand, flipping through the pages until he reached the very back, the section where the ink was smudged with what looked like salt water. There, hidden in a sketch of a lily, was a sequence of coordinates. "The old church," Ethan breathed. "The one where we met. The one where she's buried." We didn't wait for a discharge. Ethan threw on a jacket over his hospital gown, and we moved through the service exit, his security detail forming a human shield around us. The drive to the countryside was a blur of high-speed turns and the silent, heavy weight of the clock ticking down. My vision was starting to blur at the edges, the first sign of the protein breaking down my system. "Stay with me, Charity," Ethan pleaded, pulling me into his lap in the back of the SUV. "Talk to me. Tell me about the first house you want to design. Tell me about the color of the walls in our bedroom." "Blue," I choked out, clutching his hand. "Like the ocean. Not the dark, scary part, the part where the sun hits the water." "Anything you want," he promised, his voice breaking. "I'll give you the whole damn ocean." We arrived at the graveyard under a moonless sky. The old stone church stood like a sentinel in the dark. Ethan carried me toward Grace's headstone, his men sweeping the area with infrared scopes. He knelt in the dirt, his hands searching the base of the marble cross. "Nothing," he hissed, his frustration boiling over. "There's nothing here." "The vault," I whispered, my voice fading. "The key to the vault." "Ethan, check the Easter Sunday protocol." He looked at the headstone. "Grace Grant. Born April 12th. He didn't dig into the dirt. He pushed against the stone itself. With a grinding sound of stone on stone, a small compartment clicked open at the base. Inside wasn't a thumb drive or a weapon. It was a single, sealed glass vial of clear liquid and a note in Grace's handwriting. "I knew they'd try to use you as a weapon, Charity. This is the only way to neutralize the protein. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to give it to you myself. Ethan, if you're reading this, don't let her go. She's the better version of us both." Ethan didn't hesitate. He snapped the vial and administered the contents. For a moment, my heart felt like it was being squeezed by a giant hand. I gasped, my lungs seizing, and then the pressure vanished. The blurred edges of my vision cleared. The heat in my blood cooled into a steady, rhythmic pulse. I looked up at Ethan, who was shaking, his forehead pressed against mine as he sobbed with sheer relief. "You're okay," he whispered. "You're okay." "I'm okay," I echoed, reaching up to wipe the tears from the face of the man who had walked through hell to find me. 6 months later, the sun was shining over the Amalfi coast. The villa we'd bought was a masterpiece of light and space, No heavy drapes, no dark mahogany, just white stone and the endless blue of the Mediterranean. I stood on the balcony, watching Ethan walk up the path from the beach. He looked younger now, the lines of grief and duty smoothed away by the salt air and the peace we'd fought so hard to find. He wasn't a priest, and he wasn't a mobster. He was just a man who loved me. He reached the balcony and wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. The contractor called. He says the nursery is finished. Exactly how you designed it. I turned in his arms, smiling as I placed his hand over my stomach, the real pregnancy this time, the one that wasn't a contract or a weapon, but a choice. You think he'll like the blue walls? Ethan kissed my forehead, his eyes full of a light I'd once thought was impossible. He'll love them. But he'll love the woman who designed them even more. I looked out at the water, thinking of Grace, thinking of the wedding I'd left behind, and the life I'd found in the ruins. I hadn't just survived the contract, I had rewritten it. You know, Ethan, I said, a mischievous spark in my eyes. I still haven't seen those $5 million. He laughed, a deep, rich sound that echoed over the cliffs. It's in a trust fund for the baby charity. But if you're feeling underpaid, I suppose I could negotiate a new bonus structure. Oh? And what does that involve? He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a promise that had nothing to do with business. A lifetime of breakfast in bed, no more secrets, and a husband who thinks you're the most dangerous treasure in the world. Deal, I whispered, pulling him closer. The past was a ghost, the future was a dream, but in that moment, under the Italian sun, we were finally perfectly real. This time, I didn't need a contract to know I was exactly where I belonged. This time, I wasn't walking away.